every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
You need the right people in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you have the right people in the right place, but at the wrong time.
I've got to keep going forward. I've got to keep looking for revenue streams. I've got to keep looking for growth, keep looking at new ways of doing things.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development program I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated. Yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times, and only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk. On this episode of ScaleUp Radio, I've gone back into the archives to look again at one of the great guests that we have had on. And the respected author, speaker and expert on the subject of scaling up, Jan Cavelle, appeared on ScaleUp Radio. She is someone who definitely speaks from a place of experience, having run and scaled up a furniture business which started as purely a sales business but ended up with 2 factories and 40 employees. And the conversation is, without doubt, one of the most value-filled ones that we've ever done on ScaleUp Radio. And if you're someone who is looking to scale up your business, then there is so much in this episode for you. And amongst the subjects we cover are things like the importance of focus to the scaling up of your business. You need to be really committed to it. What is the difference between growth and scaling up? Aren't they just 2 sides of the same coin? We talk about the benefits of putting a system in place for scaling up and understanding that a system is only still part of the solution, and the power of the phrase hire slow, fire fast, and how that can fit into the culture of your business. And these really are just the brief highlights. There's so much covered in this episode, and it was great to have someone like Jan sharing her expertise and knowledge. Of course, Jan isn't the only one to write about the process of scaling up your business, and we'll put a link in the show notes to my book, which has just come out, called The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. Welcome to another episode of ScaleUp Radio. I'm here with Jan Cavelle, who is a respected writer, author and speaker on the subject of scaling up and has scaled up her own business. So Jan, welcome to ScaleUp Radio.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's great to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. And I'm looking forward to having a great discussion around the challenges of scaling up, which we know are many. So Jan, yes, tell us about yourself. What's got you here today?
Well, it's a somewhat circuitous route, I think, is the honest answer to that, Kevin, because I was a small business owner for decades, quite literally. And one business I had took off because I was pushing it very hard and very seriously, unlike the others. And therefore it did take off at one stage, which is going back a little while now. And so I found myself in a situation whereby I was scaling a business. I knew very little about business. I knew quite a lot about sales. And so the growth was in some ways on paper the easy bit, and the rest of it was the hard bit. Because I really got a gold star on ignorance. And
Well, few of us can get a gold star in ignorance, I think. Yeah.
Well, I certainly did. But but the thing grew. Okay, but when it got to a certain stage of scaling, it became this huge battle of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, which so many people are familiar with. And at the time, I assumed it was just me and my ignorance. And so I went hunting for knowledge and information and got to know a great deal through clubs and talking to other entrepreneurs and high growth people who were doing it hugely successfully and were very tolerant of me in sharing their knowledge. And, it all came a bit late in the day for me to sort that business out, really, because you need, as you know so well, you need to really scale up. You need to get the structure right underneath the foundations, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it absolutely wore me out. I just burnt out completely and walked away from the thing, but with
Right.
vast amounts of relief, to be honest. But it become a fascination to me as to why, we've got this thing which we were talking about earlier, whereby it's the startups are so hard to do. And you and I were both saying, startups one thing, but scale ups is what's really hard to do, and yet it's talked about less, and there's less knowledge kicking around. And the more I became fascinated by this, the more I thought I need to go on writing, because I was writing for Real Business in those days. And I need to go on writing, and I need to try and share some knowledge to help others avoid all the pit traps. But pit traps, they were pit traps. I think that's a good name for my shit. But pit traps I walked into, which were many and a learning curve, but huge. And so many people do.
Yeah. I think you've coined a new phrase there, the pit trap. So that's the pitfalls and the bear traps. Yeah,
absolutely.
Very good. So tell me about the business that you scaled up, because I think you were part of a couple of micro businesses initially, but then it sounds like from what you're saying, you focused on one of them, and that then you did manage to scale. So tell us a little bit about that business. And
that business had come about because I was a single mum at the time, and I needed to grow a business more seriously than I'd done before, which was a question, as you rightly say, of small startups, either just me on my own or me and somebody else having a lot of fun and without any particular end goal other than making an income. But all of a sudden I had to think very seriously in the short term about earning an income because of being a very broke single mum. And then it became, actually this is just about staggered and got up and going from a kitchen table start. And it very gradually added, it was just a sales operation, hence the sales thing. Okay. And I gradually added manufacturing to service the supply chain.
And what
back to front way of doing it in furniture.
In furniture, right? Okay.
And so it was all back to front really. So I had this huge increasing demand and couldn't service it. So as I say, the manufacturing side grew, and all of a sudden, it began to take off as something. Not how I'd imagined it at all. I just thought it was me and maybe a couple of other people as per usual. And, the next thing I knew a few years later, that I was with 2 factories and 40 odd people.
Yeah.
So bizarre situation. It can take hold of your life and take you over. And you do, all of a sudden you sort of wake up suffering from shell shock one morning.
Yeah, so it's almost an accidental scaling up from in a way.
Yeah, and I think an awful lot of people do it because we don't talk about scaling up. We don't realise there's such a big gap coming up, or leap, should I say, coming up between the 1 and 2 million, depending on your sector and everything else, or even sometimes 500k. But you are going to have to change everything. We just think, oh, well, I'll add some more growth. And, there's always changes that actually you need to make, and you don't realize, you just look and think, oh, well, if we can really push on, we can do another 100K next year or whatever, and that's got to be a good thing, without realizing that this is a point that you have to actually change everything to succeed.
Yeah. And I definitely want to get into that in a moment. Something else that interests me from what you said at the beginning there, though, was that you got to the point where you felt burnt out.
Mm.
To maybe talk us through that, because I suspect there's a few people that might be feeling the same.
No, I feel so sorry for so many business sectors. I've got friends, for example, in travel business now with their own businesses, and I absolutely applaud their perseverance to be surviving this, and how they're on their feet at all, I've no idea. I think there are a lot of things involved for me. I very much lost my why. I was very driven. I mean, I had the business for 20 odd years, and personally, I've also come to the conclusion, but that's something else I'm experimenting with as an idea at the moment, but actually 20 years is damn sight too long for you to have your own business, or the same business, should I say. But leaving that point aside for a minute, I'd started it with this idea of doing it to provide for the children. Well, of course, 20 years later, children have long since waved goodbye, Mum, and it's still nice to see the back of you. And, don't need that. So you're doing it for because it's a good idea, because it's sensible, because that's what you do. None of those are going to get you fired up to do it. So without realizing, to some extent, I've lost an awful lot of my why, and I'm a huge believer in the why, and the passion is what keeps you going and stops you getting burnt out. So that was a big part of it. Also, I think there were so many things. So the constant bashing of trying to do it right and not being able to, and finding out that I would go off to a course and find out some brilliant idea, and light bulb moment, what I could change, and of course it was too late to undo. If you're, for example, if you've got two factories, what would have been ideal in many ways would be to halve the business and start that growth all over again. But it's not always possible. You might be tied into a long-term lease or whatever, and with a not supportive landlord who would actually, and who in some ways would blame, so take kindly to your suggestion that you'd like to break the lease or whatever. So there's often, so you feel there's no way out, and the harder you work, the harder nothing happens. And it's very easy to get burnt out, I think, running your own business, unless there's enough passion.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, absolutely, in a really tough position to be in, and also almost sort of illustrates one of the, because there's the twin aspect. There's the one aspect of how do we get to scale in the first place? How do we actually start that ball rolling? But then also, how do we make sure we think about it early enough and get the right system structures, whatever, in place, so that when we do have that kind of business, it's not all completely a mad tearing our hair out and we get burnt out. So let's go back, because I think talking from the same standpoint. What do you think? We know that in this country, only 4% of businesses scale beyond 10 employees, don't we? And less than 1% beyond the 50. So let's go right back to that, to that first one. What do we think some of the reasons are that 96% of businesses in this country have fewer than 10 employees?
I think that's a really interesting question. I was staggered when I first heard those statistics many years ago now, but it's really surprising the first time you hear it, isn't it? I think possibly the biggest reason that occurs to me is that they haven't really looked at whether there's a market demand for scalability, or there may not be a market demand for scalability, and they may have looked, of course. You have to have that growth capacity in your market to be able to scale. before you start, and therefore add people. So I'd say that's probably the starting point myself. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'd agree. You know, we've certainly got to have. It's got to be the market potential in there. I wonder also. I think there's a lot of things that come into play, and part of mindset and desire, of course, is one of those. You know, that there's quite a chunk of people within or businesses within that 96% that possibly don't want to scale. You know, they're actually quite happy to either be maybe even a sole trader or certainly stay nice and small. Like they're comfortable with that, which of course is absolutely fine, isn't it? And you can build a very nice business and a very good business that keeps you supported and your family supported, and that's great. So I think desire is definitely one of those things, and I wouldn't want to push onto anybody the fact that, you know, saying you've got to scale up, you know, because that's certainly not right for everybody. But that aside, there's a big chunk of people and businesses that would like to, but they don't really know how to go about it, would be my view. And I think there's a number of factors in there. And one of those might be about feeling that, you know, how do we handle it? You know, it's hard enough now. I've got 3 employees and I'm doing £300,000 and I'm already tearing my hair out. So how on earth could I do double that? So that there's that aspect, isn't there? So there's that understanding that actually there are some structures and things we need to put in place. But you mentioned something at the beginning as well, which ties in with that sort of desire a bit, which is focus. I mean, you said you were part of 3 or 4 smaller businesses that didn't really go anywhere, and then this one did when you applied some energy and time and focus on making happen. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think focus is absolutely crucial, and desire. I totally agree with you that, you know, microbiz matters, as Tony Robinson would say. You know, it's so important to the economy, to this country. And I was very, very happy. It was before I had children, and I didn't need a long-term huge income or anything else. But I was terribly happy running micro businesses. They're great. And, you know, champion, absolutely. You know, so you know, I agree with you and get that out there. But with regard to focus, I think, you know, there's all this business of people saying, oh, well, you know, you just have to do it right and then you can take life easy and grow your businesses. To me, that's a load of tosh. You know, you have to generate that passion and that focus. And again, it comes from a passion. You know, if you are that passionate, of course, you're going to live and breathe it and be that focused on it.
Yeah. Okay. Should we take it from that sort of point? You know, let's just say, you know, we've got a business that's starting to look like it's got something. You know, it's got beyond the startup stage, and maybe they have got a couple of employees plus themselves, and maybe they are turning over £200,000 or £300,000, something like that. Now, what are some of the things they need to think about if they want to take this business further and start that scale up journey? Absolutely. And, you know, that's a great moment to start, you know, sort of 2 to 500 turnover, you know, is when you want to start putting those foundations in place. And I think that's really important. I think the first thing they want to think about is why, because, you know, it's very seductive, this idea of, probably all our egos getting in the way, and I know I fell through it. You know, it sounds wonderful, doesn't it? You know, the bigger we grow our businesses, the more successful we'll be. Yeah. And of course, that's not necessarily true. You know, you can easily lose all the profits that you nicely have the small business in growth and everything else. So growth isn't always right. Again, I would say, you know, that's the moment to research your market and be absolutely sure that there's the potential in the marketplace there to bring in, wherever you're aiming at, 1 million, 2 million's worth of sales, and that you've really nailed your differential that's going to knock the socks out of everybody else, and you're going to be ahead of the game in order to do that. Because while yes, I could have done a lot better on absolutely everything, bar possibly the sales are still vital. Let's face it, without sales, we don't have a business, and sales are crucial. So they've got to do their research firstly, I think, of all things. So researching your market, making sure there is a demand for it. But then you said knowing your differentials, I think, didn't you, in there as well? So what is it that differentiates you from the people out there? Because maybe we should answer the question: what's the difference between growth and scaling up?
Good question. I get asked this a lot, and I'm sure you do too. And it's changed, hasn't it, over the years? Because we used to talk about scaling in the sense of getting a huge investment from venture capital. And now we talk about scaling. You can have a bootstrapped scale up.
Yep.
So it's broadened right out to be a sustainable growth that you're going to take to a much larger size, as opposed to necessarily something that's venture capital backed. Obviously, it often is.
Yes, and I think there's something in there as well about, growth is simply repeating the kind of growth trajectory that you've had, and the increase in the cost base that goes with it. So if I'm a law firm and I've got 10 paralegals or whatever else, and I do a certain amount of work, if I want to grow by 10%, I might need to take on another paralegal, and if I want to grow by 20%, I might need to take on another one. And that's growth. But that's not really scaling, is it? Scaling is getting the business model right in the first place. That means actually now we can grow at a rate that outstrips our cost base in a way, doesn't it? Something along those lines.
I couldn't agree more, because people get obsessed by looking at turnover. As you've just said, they look at, shall we add one person, X turnover, whatever, and that's going to mean a gross business and we're doing frightfully well. And, it doesn't, because they forget to look at increasing profit, which is what they should be looking for. And if you add your one paralegal, it might just tip you over the edge to the fact that you can't manage all the paralegals you've got. So you need a manager in to manage them. And that, of course, is going to knock out any profit that extra paralegal can make. So it's only worth doing if you can see you can have maybe 3 or 4 paralegals extra to cover the managers and still make the same amount of profit as you were before. So it's a lot about planning a balance between that growth and systemizing and strategy. The strategy is so crucial, which is why you can't drift into it.
And strategy is one of those words that we all talk about, we all refer to, and we all think we know what it means. But actually, it's not that easy, is it? And it's used sometimes very well, but also sometimes as a bit of a catch-all for all sorts of things, isn't it? So it is really important. And what I was thinking from what you were saying there is if we called it the business model, and we said, what does it take to get the business model right to scale from, say, 200,000 or 300,000, turnover to 500,000 and maybe the next step. That's then when that brings in all sorts of things, doesn't it? Because we've got to do the market research today to make sure that there's a demand for it. We've got to think about what our differentiated position is, so that actually we've got a positioning within that, so that when it comes to charging, we're not necessarily just charging on competing on price with everybody else. There's something different about us that maybe allows us to charge a little bit more or make a bit more profit at the same price, something like that. So there's that kind of, that comes around to sort of competitive advantage in a way, doesn't it? But then, as you say, that we've got the model right, so that if we then do double in size, we don't double in costs, but also, or worse in some respects, which often happens, but equally that we don't just double in terms of hassle, because what you described right at the very beginning of this was that you grew and you grew and you grew, and all your troubles grew and you grew and you grew to the point where actually, I think, which is what you
no, absolutely,
to the point where it wore you down. So if we're going to scale, we've got to find a way that does it, that doesn't mean it's just all coming on our shoulders all the time.
I so agree with everything you've said. And, there's lots, and it comes up back to strategy or planning, actually mapping the whole thing out. Maybe I prefer mapping as a phrase than anything else, actually, because it is a roadmap for you to follow that takes each area of that growth into account, so you can balance all of them all the time as you go forward. And so yeah, it's you've got to solve that. I mean, systems are obviously fantastic for controlling the amount of, controlling a lot of things. It can control quality, it can control the volume of administration, in theory, the volume of people needed. But, you still have to have the right people working with systems. And, if you're growing too fast and you're getting the wrong people, then the systems, however brilliant, are not going to work.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because everybody says systems are the answer, and they are definitely part of the answer.
Yeah,
you need when you're very small, your systems can be as simple as a 5 bullet point sort of type thing on a Word document or whatever. But once you get a little bit larger, then yes, you do need some systems. We've just done a ScaleUp survey challenge. We've actually recently done some research, and we've tried to pull some conclusions together, which we'll be releasing shortly. But one of the key challenges, once we get over having 4 or 5 people, that everybody refers to is getting our team to think and act in the way that we want them to think and act in the way that we, like the way that we would, which of course is a real challenge. And you can put in as many systems and processes as you like for boiling the kettle and putting something in the microwave or whatever else, but actually you can't legislate for everything. There's always going to be something that comes out of that that's from left field that you want them to be able to not just come running to Kevin or Jan and go, this is new, what do we do about it? But you want them to have thought about it and thought, I know what Kevin would do in this situation, or I know what Jan would do in this situation. I don't know whether it's the right time to get onto that now, but that was just picking up on what you said about systems being part of the answer, but not the whole thing.
I completely agree with you. I mean, just, briefly to give everybody an example on the systems, I mean, because I'm hot on sales, you can have a wonderful CRM system, but, if your salespeople don't bother to put in the data, it's going to tell you damn all about your clients, and it does. It comes down as simple as that. I mean, getting the right people, I agree with you. It doesn't surprise me, though. I can't wait to see the findings of your research. But it doesn't surprise me at all that people come out. So they're certainly at the top because they are the one that people say to me is the biggest issue, and that people are scared of too. So many people ask me, where do you find the right people? And how do you find the right people? It's very, very difficult, but it comes down to creating a culture, which is not easy at all, and maintaining a culture in growth is even harder. Using myself as an example, we actually had a great culture while we were growing, and it's a really fantastic culture. But in time, with all the problems of scaling at a certain level and 1 or 2 mishires, that culture was gradually eaten away.
Right.
And that's one thing I'd say really important. There's that phrase of hire slow, fire fast, and I think it's really true. If you've got a rotten hire somewhere, not that they're not particularly good at their job, you can probably sort that out, but who's actually not on board with the culture, however brilliant they are at what they do, you want that person out yesterday, preferably. Is my belief, because they can destroy an entire culture and then you'll go nowhere. Yeah.
And I've been recently picked up again one of Jim Collins's books, and he talked in there, you in terms of performance against metrics and the numbers that that you'd like people to do. There's always a little bit of leeway with that. You want them to do it, but sometimes there are reasons why you might miss a number or whatever else. The performance might be a little bit not quite where it wants to be, and of course you do need to give a little bit of latitude there. But when it comes to the core values and the culture within the business, there is no wiggle room. If somebody is undermining the culture of the business,
Absolutely.
then that's it.
Absolutely, you're very, very right. And I feel that terribly strongly. It was a massive problem for me, and I saw it for myself, and I discussed it with many people, and they all came up with the same story. And it's something that's echoed in the people I talk to for articles and books and other entrepreneurs, and anybody who's had somebody who is culture subversive, they've got to go really fast.
Yeah. So let's have a little bit thing on that. So when's the right time to get the culture started within the business?
I think from day one, it's a change in culture because, of course, if there's 2 or 3 of you that start, you're probably having crazy fun and it's all a bit mad and everybody knows what's going on, and you can be flexible on hours because you always work antisocial hours if you had something more important to do, and all those things that are great for culture because everybody's enjoying themselves and they're having a great time and a great lifestyle balance and all those things. And that's much more difficult as you go bigger and you start having systems in place, and in some ways that it can stifle the culture that you've created at the startup that's crazy fun. And I think the key is to get the right people on your left and your right in early, for me, because I think then you're not trying to line manage too many people. They can break down and help you break down sort of mini teams, but therefore can have that flexibility and the sort of craziness of startup and if you like, and the whole vibe of being a small group. I mean, obviously you've got to mesh the whole thing together with common values, but I think if you've got more of you, then it's easier. You cannot afford to get past, say, 15 people and it only be you, because you can't do it, however hard you try.
Yeah.
And,
definitely. So there's something in there about making sure that you don't try and manage too many people, and there's also that thing about defining it really early. And I know from my corporate career, if you like, when I first started in corporate, I know full well that if somebody had come to me when I was busy with my job, and they said to me, right, Kevin, we want to spend some time thinking about core values and core purpose, I know I'd have gone, okay, but I'm a bit busy at the minute. That's probably not the most, I don't see that as being the most important thing. And yet what we're saying here is that actually, and I think what you and I have seen, that if a business doesn't get its core culture sorted really early on, then they're going to give themselves problems, aren't they? Doomsday.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was interesting too, because, we in my ignorant first 10 years before I spoke to anybody on any advice about anything, we did have values, and among them was fun. Yeah. And, they were our values and they worked really well. And when I started working with coaches and going to group seminars and everything, people encouraged me to go for excellence and doing doing this and quite serious stuff. And actually looking back on it, it lost everything. I think that was really a key moment, but it lost a lot of things, that the business bought into. Yes, people voted for the new values, but from a mildly restricted list, and I think under a lot of pressure that, we were now trying to grow and do well and be good, and a lot of things which actually they weren't buying into at all. And I think that can be really dangerous. They've got to be values that make your staff want to get out of bed, or your team get out of bed in the morning too.
Yeah. So they've always got to buy into them. They've also got to be credible, haven't they? Not just something that people think, well, that's just they've got to be pragmatic, realistic, if you like. They're not just something that is on a bit of paper that somebody said, this is what we're about.
Absolutely, and you've got to be realistic, as you rightly say. I mean, I was dealing with a large manufacturing floor, and people who were in moderately transient jobs, unskilled labour, say, packing up, were not going to be excited about a company that talked about excellence and whatever. Whereas having fun at work, that sounds a bit different. I might give that a go.
Yeah.
And that's relating your values to your people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, and I'm sure we could talk for a long time about how you go around setting those values, but making sure then that people understand them in their roles, and they're not just something that's gone on the wall, but they've actually thought, let's just say it was fun, what does that mean in my role?
Absolutely.
I'm either, maybe I'm packing the shelves, picking and packing or whatever, so what does having fun mean in my role? That I'm
definitely.
And equally if I'm customer service, whatever. So that's definitely part of it, isn't it? And then also, one of the things that we talk with our business about is, and you've mentioned it already, when we're and then embedding those values in all the different aspects of the business. So not just saying, well, that's what we are and it's on the wall, but when we recruit somebody, how do we bring those values into recruitment? When we onboard them, when we do evaluations with them, when we're doing our planning sessions, it's all of that, isn't it? Not just on the wall for everybody.
Absolutely. No, they cannot. You're so right. They cannot be just a tick box thing on the wall. It has to underpin, as you said, everything you do, from the way you plan things, the way you operate, your assessments, your recruitment, a lot. I absolutely agree.
And that for me, when we both talked a little earlier about systems and process being important, but only getting us so far, that for me is the answer. I'm not saying it's an easy answer, but it's a big part of the answer. It's the missing link there. Like the two go together. If we can get a culture where everybody understands what our core purpose is, what's driving us, where we're trying to get to, our why. You talked about our why at the beginning. Why are we in business? Why do we do whatever it is that we do? So with the furniture or whatever it might be. But if then also there's a set of values which are that are kind of our framework for making any decision that might not fit into a process, but so we have a process, but now we've got these values that we know have come from the group. We know that the leader of the business, the owner of the business, has been integral with that, but actually other people have also helped to input into those values. So they're bought into as that is the culture that we are. Then when we have something come up, we've either got a process for it and we understand why that process exists, or if we don't have a process for it, we've got a way of making a decision around it that doesn't require knocking on your door or my door and going, what do I do?
Absolutely. And it gets fatal, so quickly if it all relies on you. You can't do it however hard you try. Yeah. And we tend to be very stubborn and try quite hard, but you just can't.
Yeah. And, I know it's a bit, people out there might be going, well, this is a bit idealistic, but if you start in that way and you really do have that culture, your people then are wanting to achieve what you want to achieve within the business. And it's not just a case of saying, well, here are the rules and here are your targets for the next quarter, and these are the hours you need to work and all of that. But they're actually, you've given them the intent and they bought into the intent. And then because the vast majority of people actually want to do well, then they will, and they don't require then the danger zone of micromanaging the performance.
I couldn't agree more. And, it is, as you say, if, for example, they're having a whale of a time in their job and enjoying it much more than their previous job, it follows. They will, without thinking about it, want to do well at it and for the company to do well, because and it'll go on. It's logical and simple. It's there. So it's so crucial. It's not a tick box.
Yeah. Brilliant. Good. So we talked a little bit, so that sort of bridges a little bit between the strategy and the people side of things, that culture. We talked a bit about the strategy and making sure you've got your research and market right. You've thought about your business model. There's something in there that we didn't touch upon that I think is misunderstood a little bit, which is this idea of our USP. Again, that's another one of these little acronyms that's banded around. Our unique selling proposition. Most people will have heard of that. What's our USP? And we know, again, from our research, that if you ask 100 business owners, do they have a USP? 90-something% of them will say yes. All right. But if you ask them some questions that lead to, well, okay, what is the point of a USP? So the evidence that you've got a USP, rather than whether you think you've got one, the evidence really is whether you have a truly differentiated position in the marketplace. If you have a truly differentiated position in the marketplace, then almost by definition, you're either able to charge more than your competitors and still maintain or grow market share, aren't you? Yeah, because if you've got an advantage that your customer thinks, you've got that. That would be an offer advantage, if you like, or you've got something about the way you do business internally, your systems and procedures and your operations, that mean that at the same price, you're able to make better profits than your competitors. And when you ask questions like that, and this is, I think this is an understanding that a lot of business owners don't have, and it's one of the reasons why they can't scale, is they haven't really truly understood that they need to have some kind of a competitive advantage. If they're going to grow their profits at a faster rate than they grow their top line, then they're going to need to have something about their business model and therefore that's part of the strategy that means that they do have a competitive advantage. What do you think of that? I know it's first time.
I think you're absolutely right. I'm, as usual, probably more obsessed with the sales and marketing side of getting the differential for whatever they're selling, right? But you're equally just as correct, if not more so, in saying that the whole business needs to be geared and relevant, and there has to be something about it that's different in the way they're providing a service. And they've just got to really nail a place which is nobody's been to before.
Yeah, good. So you mentioned something at the early on about that challenge. You mentioned figures to 1 million to 3 million, depending on the industry, really. But I think what you're talking about is that transition from probably having somewhere around about 8 to 12 employees to which you can just about handle as a leader, as a single leader of the business, can't you? You can just about keep it going. Yeah. But if you've now got 20, 25 employees, which is, the kind of, we talk about stepping stones in the ScaleUp journey, that's kind of like the next one. That's a big transition, isn't it?
It's huge. And I think the reason I'm fluffy about the exact amount is because, obviously, for example, it does depend on sector. You might have a sector where money goes on wages or whatever, things. But yeah, I mean, if the transition between that small group of people you start with to a 25-person business is just a morph of, into from sort of caterpillar to butterfly, you hope, but it isn't necessarily.
Yeah. So what do we think are some of the real things that need to be thought about then in that transition?
People, and more people. How you're going to keep a culture going. How you're going to fund it. How you'll go. Well, we've talked a lot about marketing differential and sales, but you have got to keep the sales going. Where you're going in the long term, what is, yes, you're making a leap from 1 to 3 at the moment, but what's the long-term goal? Because you won't be able to do this business forever. Or, the chances are something will change, the business might last, something may change in your life, you may want out of it. It may be something you pass down as succession, but it doesn't always go that way. There's so many things. You've got to have a B plan, in my opinion, too.
Yeah.
And a very, very clear aim of what's the shelf life, when are you going to say enough's enough?
Okay. All right. So what do we think about from the people point of view, because you were talking earlier on as well about making sure we don't have too many direct reports. So that is certainly a transition, isn't it, from as I say, having maybe me leading a team of 9 or 10 people to now having different. So what do we need to think about from the people and maybe the structure point of view there?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're looking at going to 25 people, say you are looking at creating something, you hope you're creating some value and an optionally sellable business.
Yeah.
And therefore you want at least a couple of people on your side who are going to profit by the way the business grows. It may be inappropriate or not your wish or whatever to have everybody in business having a shared ownership, but you're not going to be able to do it all yourself. And the difference of having a couple of people who are going to benefit by that long-term growth, wherever it takes, is just going to be phenomenal in terms of buy-in. And it's like more than a problem shared, it's an entire, sort of being shared. So, I do believe that's crucial.
So thinking about some kind of incentive that it is either to do with a share incentive, but something that motivates to a couple of people to really share in where you're trying to take the business. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, no, I do think so. I mean, it may be different, for example, if you're already a partnership, or if you're a husband and wife, that's a public partnership and you're both involved, then there's more of you. So on the off days, or if you need a break or whatever, there is somebody to step in, or, somebody else who's got different strengths to you. Yeah. But if you're a solo entrepreneur who is going on the scale journey, you're going to have some other people involved, I think.
Yeah. And how many, let's say we are now scaling, how many direct reports should we be thinking about having?
I suspect you've probably done more studying than me, but I think my own findings tend to be around the 15 mark is as maximum as anybody can cope with directly. But, that leaves you a lot of scope. It depends, though, if you're running the business. I mean, if you're going to step back altogether, then I'd strongly suggest that you have one of those other, sort of right-hand, left-hand people as a strong people person who's going to have 95% of their time addressed to culture and people. Yeah. Because, somebody's got to run the business as well. And again, we try and be that people person. My door is always open, isn't that a wonderful idea? But how can your door always be open 24/7? And you be the one who's growing a business. You can't do it. There is this element of too many sayings expecting Superman.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just thinking that the thought of having 15 direct reports and trying to run a business is frying my brain just thinking about it. Actually, I think we'd be. I think that idea of we talk about sort of 8 to 12 is about the maximum that one person can really drive, and really just about get a hand on. But I think if you're trying to develop the kind of business that is less reliant on you as the owner, as you scale, and you don't end up with burnout, but equally you've created a business that isn't totally reliant on you, then I think the number drops quite significantly. And we would say that really you want to try and get the kind of business that probably you only have as the owner of the business 3, maybe maximum 4 direct reports. Otherwise, you'll spend all of your time dealing with people issues.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. But that's certainly going to take you some time to make that transition, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's rather like with the clients, they all want, they've started off dealing with you in person. And so when you grow, they go, well, I don't want to speak to anybody else. But, how are you going to grow this business if you don't win the clients off you as well? They can't have all your time. And the people have all your time, and
right. And that's a really interesting. You've led me into something else there, which is great. we talk about something called the owner's trap, where you create the kind of business that essentially it's got a vicious circle in a way that, because you're the one that started the business, and you're probably very good at the bit that whatever you're doing with that business, you win their first customers. They come to you and say, well, yeah, that's fantastic. They also say, well, oh, Kevin, can you do this as well? Because you're really good at doing that stuff, but can you do this as well? So you go, oh yeah. So you start to do a couple more of them, but of course you're the only one that can do that as well. And before you know it, even when you try and bring in other people, your clients, your customers are still coming back to you all the time. So how do we break that cycle is one of those things, isn't it? And we also talk about what you've just said there is as well. It's about, if you're the one that's bringing all the business, you become essentially the rate limiting step. You become the bottleneck of the growth of this business, don't you? So if you're the one that's brilliant, in your case in terms of the sales, and you're not able to bring anybody else behind you that also is good at the sales, there comes a point at which, however good you are, you reach a ceiling. It could be, it could be at 500,000 turnover, it could be at 5 million turnover, it could be at 50 million, but at some point you reach the maximum as to what you can physically do. So there's that thing early on about, and we talk about early on, certainly up to that 9 employee sort of type, 10 employee type level, delegation is about delegating the things that actually you shouldn't be doing, right? And to allow you to focus on the things that you are the best at in the business. And so you get rid of all your admin and all the things that, other things that really you shouldn't be doing. But to get you from the 9, 10 employee level up to the 20, 25, you've now got to start being able to delegate the things that you are good at and that you enjoy and you're the best at. Yeah.
Very, very true. Yeah, I was very lucky. I had a son who was very good in sales and was looking for a sort of first serious job. So, and justified the clients trusted because he was still family. So I oozled out of my position. But it isn't easy to let go of the things you're good at either. And also I think you miss parts because, if you're put into, computer programming or whatever, then the thing you enjoy is gone and you're left with all the stuff which, actually wasn't your idea. The business isn't a startup anymore, so there's not quite that thrill. And that's where, in essence, you're transitioning slowly from being a founder into a CEO. And a lot of people don't like it, but they feel it's a sort of given to become a CEO. And actually, they'd probably do better going on being a founder and hiring a CEO.
There's a really good point, isn't it? And again, you said right at the beginning about holding on to a business too long. We've got to recognise, haven't we, where our strengths are, which are a combination of our strengths, but also where the role we want to play. And yes, we the person that started the business, the one that had the energy and the drive and the passion to get it off the ground, something new, break new ground maybe, is not always the person to manage the business and lead the business going forwards, as it becomes a bit of a bigger beast, and we do have processes that we need to have and people we've got to manage and whatever else may not suit the founder.
Absolutely. And of course, I think we see that coming horribly true when, the higher growth businesses and the venture capitalists getting involved, and they manage to get the founders out at all costs because for a variety of reasons, granted, because they want a free hand, but also quite often because they want somebody who is more experienced as a CEO. Yeah. So it doesn't do anybody any favors. But, we really should value these people who are founders far more, because it is a special skill set. And, to get a business off the ground, my goodness, you've done well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And you've shouldered all that risk yourselves, because it's something that you've unproven largely. You've done it. You've found a way to create a business around something that you were passionate about. It's a really tough thing to do.
Definitely.
And yet it might well be a different skill from the one that will scale the business again. So thinking about personality types and your strengths and whatever, and either the roles that you need to play as the founder of the business and the leader of the business, or how you need to bring other people in to play some of those roles that maybe are not your strengths as you scale. Yeah.
I
Good.
completely agree. I think it's too much of a given now that people go founder and CEO.
Yeah. Well, certainly I've really enjoyed this discussion. I know we've only touched on, I feel that there might be a second discussion that we could have.
I'd love that.
Yeah, we focused really, haven't we, on the strategy bit. We've talked a bit about that. We talked about the culture and the bridge to the people, and we've touched upon a few other areas. But I think that there's definitely other things that we haven't touched upon. But I think there's some really, really good things in there. And we've also hinted at the fact that we haven't specifically used the phrase "the valleys of death," but that's something I remember picking up. I think it was Vern Harnish. I'm not sure that came up with that phrase, but if you get it wrong in between some of these transitions, if you don't think about it properly, you end up languishing in one of those valleys where you've grown, as you've taken on that extra paralegal, you've grown that 10% or whatever else. You've suddenly got yourself in a position where you are now unable to control it all. Your profits have gone down because maybe you've had to invest a little bit in the meantime or something, and now you're kind of stuck in here. What's the way out? We're working really hard. We seem to have grown in terms of turnover, but actually our profits are not there. We haven't got the cash to do anything we want to really do to invest in something new. What's the way out of that? And that's the danger, isn't it? If we just drift into growth.
It's huge, and I'm sure you see so much of it, and I do too. Yeah.
All right, brilliant. So is there anything you think we've missed that's really important that we really need to mention before we?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's the old adage, cash is king. How anybody's made it through the last year, goodness knows. I could take, as I say, I'll take my hat off to you, but you've got to get cash right.
I know we haven't really talked about. So I'm thinking we haven't really talked about the cash too much. So that might be something we want to come back to. And as you said, it's really, really important. We haven't really talked as well about. Touched on it, but about getting people to really deliver on the strategy and if you like execute that strategy on a really simple. So maybe that's something we talk about on another occasion. And I know before we do close, I know you've written and recently released your own book around scaling up. So did you just want to tell us a little bit about that? And how people might be able to get hold of it?
It was based on, as I say, when I'd finally sort of woken up after burning out, and it took me a few months, I thought, I'm still fascinated by this scale-up journey, and why is it so hard, and what are all the solutions that I haven't heard already? And so I went back to writing about it anyway, writing articles, and also decided I'd write a book and see if we could come up with some of the answers. And because I wanted a lot more expertise than mine, I inveigled 30 entrepreneurs around the globe to help me. And so I put the book together. So we've got some amazing people in there. And it's called Scale for Success. And it's out now in the UK and coming out very shortly in America and Australia.
Brilliant. So if people were to search for it on Amazon, they'd be able to find it, would they?
They can indeed. From Amazon, from my local bookstore, wherever they would like. It's published by Bloomsbury, so it means you can get it anywhere.
So Scale for Success by Jan Cavelle, Cavelle. Yes, and we'll.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yes.
And for anybody listening, we'll put that in the show notes as well, and try and put a link to it as well, so that if anybody wants to get hold of that, they can. So Jan, thank you very much indeed for joining me and for indulging me in having a discussion around my favourite subjects.
Mine too. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm certain that people listening will get a lot out of that discussion if they think through some of the things that we've been talking about. So thank you very much indeed.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for asking me on.
Don't forget to take a look at www.bizsmarts.co.uk to access a great range of resources to help you in your scale-up journey. So that's bizsmarts.co.uk, which is bizsmarts.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.